The Great Hall of Varanthos Prime stretched wider than any building ever constructed on Earth. And Ambassador Chen Wei felt very small as she walked across its polished floor toward the gathered delegates of 17 alien species. Every eye in the chamber watched her, and none of them held warmth or welcome. The Galactic Concord had ruled this sector of space for over 12,000 years, and they had invited humanity to this summit, not out of kindness but out of curiosity. Mixed with contempt, Chun kept her face calm and her steps steady as she approached the central platform where a holographic display showed the registered military assets of every attending species. The Silaxian hegemony glowed with over 8,000 warships on their registry, and Admiral Kethvora stood beside the display with his forearms crossed over his armored chest. His insectoid eyes glittering with amusement, the Thrawn Dominion showed 6,000 vessels. Their representative ambassador, Yethima, already making that wet gurgling sound that passed for laughter among his kind. The Veluxi Imperium displayed the largest number of all, nearly 15,000 ships of war spread across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy, and their High Sovereign Malachar watched Chun with the cold patience of a predator who had never once doubted his place at the top of the food chain. And then there was Earth. 47 ships glowed on the display next to humanity's name, and the laughter that rippled through the chamber was not hidden or polite. 47, Admiral Kethvara said, his mandibles clicking with each word. I have personally destroyed more ships than that in a single afternoon of combat. And the humans bring 47 vessels to a summit of galactic powers. Chun reached her designated position and stood with her hands clasped before her, showing no reaction to the mockery that surrounded her on all sides. We are honored to attend this gathering, she said in the trade language that her translators had spent months helping her master. Earth comes in peace and hopes to establish friendly relations with all member species of the Concord. More laughter filled the hall, and Ambassador Yethima slithered forward on his massive tentacles, his bulbous head tilting as he examined the human woman like she was some fascinating insect he had discovered. Friendly relations, he repeated, his voice bubbling through the translation matrix. How delightful that the primitives want to be friends, but tell me, little human, what exactly do you offer this Concord in exchange for friendship? Earth has many resources, Chun replied, keeping her voice steady and diplomatic. Our scientists have made advances in several fields that might interest the Concord, and our people are hard workers who could contribute to galactic trade. High Sovereign Malachar finally spoke, his crystalline body refracting the chamber lights into sharp patterns across the floor as he moved, and his voice rang with harmonics that made Chun's teeth ache. Resources we can simply take, he said. Scientists we can simply conscript, and workers we can simply enslave. So I ask again, Ambassador Chun, what do you offer that we cannot simply claim for ourselves? The question hung in the air, and every delegate in the chamber waited to see how the human would respond to such naked aggression. Chun had prepared for this moment for her entire career, and she had known before she ever boarded the ship to Varanthos Prime exactly what kind of reception humanity would receive. We offer cooperation freely given, she said, which is always proven more valuable than service taken by force. The silence that followed her words lasted only a moment before the laughter returned, louder and crueler than before. A smaller delegate from a species Chun did not recognize called out from the back of the chamber. She thinks they have a choice in the matter, and the amusement that followed made it clear that everyone present shared this opinion. Admiral Kethvora waved one of his 4 hands toward the holographic display. Perhaps the humans do not understand their position, so let me explain it simply for their primitive minds. He manipulated the display, and suddenly the chamber showed a tactical representation of Earth's solar system surrounded by the combined military might of every Concord species. Your world sits at the edge of Concord. Space, the Admiral continued. And you have exactly 47 ships to defend it against powers that have conquered thousands of worlds. So when this summit concludes, you will accept whatever terms we decide to offer. And you will be grateful that we allow your species to continue existing at all. Chun looked at the display showing Earth so small and vulnerable, and she thought about the 60 years of preparation that had led to this moment. She thought about the secret shipyards hidden in the asteroid belt, about the training facilities buried beneath the ice of Europa, about the weapons research conducted in bunkers so deep underground that no satellite could ever detect them. She thought about all the men and women who had dedicated their lives to a project they knew they might never see completed, all for the sake of this moment when humanity would face the galaxy and need to survive. But she showed none of this on her face, because the plan required her to look weak and frightened and helpless. "I understand," she said quietly. And if her voice trembled slightly, well, that only helped sell the deception. High Sovereign Malachar nodded with satisfaction, his crystalline form pulsing with colors that Chun had learned to recognize as smug pleasure. "Good," he said. "Then let us proceed with the discussions, though I suspect they will be brief since Earth has nothing to negotiate with." The summit continued for 3 days, and during that time Chun listened to the Concord species argue among themselves about who would claim which portions of Earth's resources. The Silexians wanted the mineral rights to the asteroid belt, while the Thrawn demanded access to Earth's oceans for their spawning populations, and the Veluxi claimed everything else as their due as the most powerful member of the Concord. Through it all, Chun smiled and nodded and played the part of the helpless primitive who understood that her world's fate was being decided by others. She reported everything back to Earth through encrypted channels that the Concord believed they had already cracked, feeding them exactly the information humanity wanted them to have. And deep beneath a mountain in what had once been called Colorado, Fleet Admiral Sofia Torres received each report and made her final preparations. The true fleet was ready. All they needed now was the right moment to reveal it. And Chun knew that moment would come soon enough when the Concord finally delivered their ultimatum. Until then, she would let them laugh. They would not be laughing for much longer. The third day of the summit began like the others, with the alien delegates arguing amongst themselves about how to divide Earth's future, while Chun sat quietly in her designated spot and pretended to accept her species' fate. But today felt different, and Chun could sense a tension in the chamber that had not been present before. High Sovereign Malachar stood at the center of the room, and his crystalline body had taken on a darker color that Chun had learned to associate with finality and aggression. "Enough," the Veluxi leader declared, and his voice cut through the squabbling of the other delegates like a blade through water. "We have wasted 3 days debating who will claim what portions of a primitive world, and I grow tired of this theater." Admiral Kethvara turned his insectoid head toward Malachar with obvious irritation. "The Silaxian hegemony has legitimate claims to the asteroid belt resources, and we will not simply abandon our position because the Veluxi grow impatient." "You misunderstand me," Malachar replied, and his form pulsed with cold light. "I am not suggesting we abandon negotiations between ourselves, but rather that we first secure the prize before dividing it." He manipulated the holographic display, and suddenly the chamber showed a massive fleet of Veluxi warships positioned at the edge of Earth's solar system. "My third fleet," Malachar announced with evident pride. 2,000 warships under the command of Admiral Vethkorn, one of my finest military minds. And they arrived at their position 6 hours ago. Chun felt her heart rate increase, but she kept her face carefully blank as murmurs of surprise and outrage Rippled through the chamber, Ambassador Yethema slithered forward with anger evident in every movement of his tentacles. This is highly irregular, High Sovereign. The summit was meant to determine Earth's status through diplomatic means, and so it shall. Malachar responded smoothly. I am merely providing motivation for the humans to accept whatever terms we collectively decide upon. He turned his crystalline gaze toward Chun, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical pressure against her chest. Ambassador Chun, he said, Earth will accept protectorate status under the Veluxi Imperium immediately, and your species will serve the Imperium in whatever capacity we deem appropriate. These are our terms. Chun stood slowly, aware that every eye in the chamber was fixed upon her. And if Earth refuses these terms, Malachar made a sound that the translation matrix rendered as cold amusement. Then Admiral Vethkorin will reduce your homeworld to ash, and we will harvest whatever resources remain from the debris. Your 47 ships cannot stop 2,000 Veluxi warships. And we both know this. You would destroy an entire species to make an example, Chun said. And she did not have to fake the horror in her voice, because even knowing what came next, the casual mention of genocide still shook her. I would destroy 1,000 species to maintain the Imperium's dominance. Malachar replied, Your world is nothing to me except a strategic resource. And resources that cannot be claimed must be denied to rivals. So yes, Ambassador, I will burn Earth to cinders if you refuse me. The chamber fell silent as the other delegates processed this threat. And Chun could see calculations happening behind their alien. Some were outraged that Malachar had moved without consulting them, while others seemed impressed by his ruthlessness. And a few looked almost sympathetic toward humanity's plight, but none of them offered to help. Chun had expected nothing else. I need to consult with my government, she said, keeping her voice small and defeated. Surely you can allow me time to communicate with Earth before we respond to such significant terms. Malachar waved one crystalline limb in a gesture of dismissive permission. You have one standard rotation, approximately 20 of your Earth hours. And then Admiral Vethkorin will begin his approach. Use your time wisely, Ambassador. Chun bowed her head in apparent submission and walked to the small communication alcove that had been assigned to the human delegation once inside. She activated the encryption protocols that would scramble her transmission into patterns that looked like random noise to anyone monitoring. Fleet Admiral Torres, she said quietly. The moment has arrived. They have positioned 2,000 ships at the system edge and delivered their ultimatum. We have 20 hours, half a galaxy away, in the command center buried beneath the Rocky Mountains. Sofia Torres received the message and felt a calm settle over her that she had not experienced in years. 60 years of preparation. 3 generations of soldiers and engineers and scientists working in absolute secrecy. And now the time had finally come. All stations, she said into the command network that connected every hidden facility in the solar system. Execute protocol revelation. I repeat, execute protocol revelation immediately. Across Earth's solar system, things began to wake up in the asteroid belt. Massive doors that had been disguised as natural rock formations slid open to reveal shipyards that had been building vessels in secret for decades beneath the ice of Europa. Engines that had never once been tested at full power roared to life as ships that officially did not exist prepared to launch in the rings of Saturn. Hidden among the ice and rock, weapons platforms activated targeting systems that had been waiting patiently for this exact moment, and in 1,000 other hidden places, the true fleet began to stir. Torres watched her displays update with information that would have seemed like fantasy to anyone outside the project, and she allowed herself a small smile. Admiral Vethkorin, she said quietly to herself, you have no idea what is about to happen to your fleet. Back on Varanthos Prime, Chun emerged from the communication alcove and returned to her seat in the grate. All High Sovereign Malakar watched her with obvious satisfaction, clearly expecting to see fear and desperation in the human's expression. Instead, Chen looked calm, almost serene. And something about that expression made Malakar feel a flicker of uncertainty. For the first time since the summit began, you seem remarkably composed for someone whose world faces annihilation, he observed. Chen met his crystalline gaze without flinching. I have faith in my people, High Sovereign, and I believe that the next 20 hours will prove very educational for everyone in this chamber. Malakar dismissed her words as the empty bravado of a doomed species, but he could not quite shake the feeling that he was missing something important. He was right to worry. In less than 18 hours, the galaxy would learn that humanity had been playing a very different game than anyone had realized, and the laughter that had filled the halls of Varanthos Prime would turn to shocked silence. The true fleet was coming, and nothing would ever be the same again. Admiral Vethkoran stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Crystalline Vengeance, and watched the distant blue dot that was Earth with the same expression a predator might show toward prey that did not yet know it was being hunted. His fleet of 2,000 warships held formation at the edge of the solar system, their weapons charged and their crews eager for the glory that would come from crushing humanity's pitiful resistance. Status report, Vethkoran commanded, his crystalline form pulsing with the deep purple that indicated readiness for battle. His tactical officer responded immediately. All ships report battle-ready, Admiral, and our sensors show the human defense fleet holding position near their third planet. They have not attempted to flee or disperse. Vethkoran made a sound of contempt. 47 ships against 2,000. And they choose to stand and fight rather than scatter and survive. Perhaps the humans are braver than I expected, or simply too stupid to recognize hopeless odds, another officer suggested. And laughter rippled across the bridge. The Admiral allowed himself to enjoy the moment, knowing that this victory would secure his position in the Imperium for centuries to come. Then his sensor officer made a sound that Vethkoran had never heard before. A high-pitched tone of pure confusion and disbelief. Admiral, the officer said, his voice trembling, I am detecting anomalies throughout the system. Multiple anomalies, hundreds of them. Vethkoran turned sharply. Explain yourself clearly. Space is folding, Admiral. In locations throughout the solar system, something is emerging from concealment. Something large. The tactical display in the center of the bridge flickered and updated, and Vethkoran felt his crystalline structure go cold as new contacts appeared. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. From the shadow of the gas giant the humans called Jupiter, massive vessels emerged from behind sensor dampening fields that should have been impossible to create from within the asteroid belt. Ships that had been hiding among the rocks activated their engines and rose like ancient predators waking from slumber, from beneath the ice of distant moons, from the rings of Saturn, from hidden places throughout the entire solar system. The true fleet revealed itself. That cannot be accurate, Vethkoran whispered. Run the sensor sweep again. I have run it 7 times, Admiral, his sensor officer replied. And there was fear in his voice now. The readings are consistent. We are facing over 3,000 capital ships, and twice that number in support vessels. Vethkoran stared at the display as it continued to update with new contacts, each one representing a ship that humanity had somehow built and hidden without anyone in the galaxy knowing. How? He demanded of no one in particular. How could they have done this? We have monitored their transmissions for decades. We have scanned their system countless times. How could they have hidden a fleet of this size? No one on the bridge had an answer on Varanthos Prime. High Sovereign Malakar received the same sensor data through his connection to the Third Fleet. And for the first time in his very long life, he felt something that might have been fear, The holographic display in the diplomatic chamber updated to show the true fleet's emergence, and the assembled delegates fell into stunned silence as they watched Earth's real military power unfold before their eyes. Ambassador Chun stood slowly, and now there was no fear or submission in her expression, only a quiet satisfaction that made Malaka's crystal structure ache with sudden understanding. "You deceived us," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "We survived," Chen corrected him, "for 60 years, while you and every other species in the Concord laughed at our weakness. We built in secret, we trained in silence, we prepared for the moment when someone would try to take everything from us." She gestured at the display, showing fleet after fleet of human warships taking formation around the stunned Biloxi Armada. "Those 47 ships you mocked were never our real defense," Chun continued. "They were a performance, a show of weakness designed to make you overconfident. And you believed exactly what we wanted you to believe." Admiral Kethfora stepped forward, his mandibles clicking rapidly in what Chun recognized as extreme agitation. "The resources required to build such a fleet would be enormous. How did you hide the economic activity from our monitoring systems?" "We did not hide it," Chun replied. "We simply let you see what you expected to see. When you detected mining operations in the asteroid belt, you assumed primitive resource extraction. When you detected energy signatures from our moons, you assumed scientific research stations. You never imagined we might be building weapons because you never believed we were capable of threatening you." The truth of her words settled over the chamber like a weight, and Chun could see the realization spreading through the assembled delegates. Humanity had not been weak. Humanity had been waiting back at the edge of the solar system. Admiral Vethkoran faced the most difficult decision of his career. His 2,000 ships were now completely surrounded by a human fleet that outnumbered him by more than 2 to 1. And worse, his sensors were detecting weapon signatures that his tactical computers could not identify. "Admiral," his weapons officer reported with evident nervousness, "the human vessels are armed with technology we have never encountered. I cannot provide accurate assessments of their combat capabilities." Vethkoran understood what this meant, because the Biloxi had spent millennia developing specific tactics for every known species in the galaxy. And those tactics relied on knowing exactly what their enemies could do against an unknown force with unknown weapons. All of that experience was worthless. A communication signal reached his bridge, and Vethkoran accepted it to find himself looking at a human woman in a military uniform, her face calm and her eyes showing no fear whatsoever. "Admiral Vethkoran," Fleet Admiral Sophia Torres said, "I am offering you one opportunity to withdraw your fleet from this system peacefully. Take it, and you may return to your Imperium with your ships and your lives intact." "You dare threaten me," Vethkoran responded, but his voice lacked the confidence it had held just minutes before. "I am not threatening you, Admiral. I am informing you of your options," Torres replied. "You may leave peacefully, or you may die here today. Those are your only choices, and I strongly recommend the first one." Vethkoran looked at his tactical display, at the human ships surrounding his fleet, at the weapon systems his computers could not analyze, and he made the only rational decision available to him. "All ships," he commanded, "prepare to withdraw. Set course for the system boundary on his bridge." Some of his officers looked relieved while others seemed ashamed. But Vethkoran knew that shame meant nothing compared to survival. The Biloxi Third Fleet retreated from Earth's solar system without firing a single shot. And across the galaxy, the balance of power shifted in ways that no one could have predicted. Humanity had shown its true strength, and nothing would ever be the same. The retreat of the Biloxi Third Fleet sent shockwaves through the galactic concord that would take years to fully understand. But the immediate aftermath played out in the Great Hall of Rantos Prime, where the assembled delegates struggled to process what they had witnessed. High Sovereign Malika stood frozen at the center of the chamber, his crystalline form cycling through colors that indicated confusion and fear and rage in rapid succession. For 12,000 years, the Veluxi Imperium had been the dominant power in this region of space, and in a single afternoon, a species they had dismissed as primitives had humiliated them before the entire galaxy. This changes nothing, Malika declared. Though his voice lacked conviction, the Imperium commands 15,000 warships, and we will return with a force that your hidden fleet cannot match. Ambassador Chun shook her head slowly. You still do not understand what has happened here today, High Sovereign. So allow me to explain it clearly. She walked to the holographic display and manipulated it to show detailed schematics of the true fleet's vessels for 60 years. While you watched us and laughed at our weakness, our scientists studied every species in the Concord, Chun said. We analyzed your weapons and your tactics and your vulnerabilities. And then we built our fleet specifically to counter everything you might throw at us. She highlighted a series of weapon systems on the display. These are graviton disruptors, designed specifically to shatter Veluxi crystalline hull structures. They operate on frequencies that bypass your natural resonance defenses. Malika's form flickered with something that looked like shock. And Chun continued without mercy. Your point defense systems rely on predictive algorithms that anticipate incoming fire based on known weapon signatures. She explained. Our missiles use randomized approach vectors that your systems cannot predict, and they carry warheads tuned to maximum effect against crystalline matter. She turned to face the other delegates, and each of them felt suddenly very aware of their own vulnerabilities. Admiral Kethfora, Chun said, addressing the Silaxian representative. Your hegemony relies on carrier swarms that overwhelm enemy point defense through sheer numbers. So we developed autonomous interceptor clouds that think faster than any organic pilot. They would reduce your fighter wings to debris before they could even engage. The Admiral's mandibles clicked rapidly, but he said nothing. Chun continued around the room, addressing each major power in turn. The Thrawn Dominion uses bioelectric weapons that disable enemy ships by overloading their power systems. So our vessels have hardened circuits and isolated backup systems that make them immune to your primary attack method. Ambassador Yethoma slithered backward as if physically struck by the information. The Velthari Collective relies on numerical superiority and expendable drone ships. So we developed weapons that can destroy hundreds of targets simultaneously through area effect detonations. On and on she went, cataloging decades of preparation and planning, revealing that humanity had not simply built a fleet but had designed specific countermeasures for every possible enemy they might face. When she finished, the chamber was silent, and every delegate present understood that they were looking at something unprecedented in galactic history. A single species, dismissed as primitive and helpless, had prepared for war against the entire galaxy and had built itself into a power that none of them could safely challenge. Why are you telling us this? High Sovereign Malika asked finally, his voice barely audible. Why reveal your capabilities when secrecy served you so well? Chun's expression softened slightly. Because we do not want war, High Sovereign. We never wanted war. Everything we built was designed for defense, not conquest. And now that you understand what attacking Earth would cost, we hope that cooler heads will prevail. She returned to her position at the diplomatic table and sat down with the calm composure of someone who held all the cards. Let us negotiate again, she suggested. But this time, let us negotiate as equals. The summit that followed was very different from the mockery that had preceded the Veluxi. Ultimatum Earth did not demand tribute or territory or submission from any Concord species, instead asking only for recognition of their sovereignty and a seat at the galactic table. This restraint confused the alien delegates more than anything else. "You have the power to take whatever you want," Admiral Kethvora said during one session. "The Silaxian hegemony would have claimed a dozen systems by now if we held your advantages. Why do you ask for so little?" Ambassador Chun considered the question carefully before responding. "Because we spent 60 years living in fear, building weapons and preparing for a war we hoped would never come. And we learned something important during those decades of secrecy." She paused to ensure every delegate was listening. "Power gained through conquest must be maintained through oppression," she continued. "And oppression breeds resentment that eventually explodes into rebellion. We do not want to spend the next 1,000 years fighting endless wars to hold territory we do not need. We want to build something better." High Sovereign Malachar made a sound that the translation matrix could not quite interpret. "You speak as if you have a plan beyond simple defense." "We do," Chun confirmed. "But that plan requires cooperation rather than conquest. And it begins with this summit, if you are willing to listen." The negotiations continued for another 3 weeks. And during that time, humanity laid out a vision for the future that none of the Concord species had ever considered, not an empire built on force, not a hegemony, maintained through fear, something entirely new and wild. Many of the delegates remained skeptical. Some began to see possibilities they had never imagined. And the seeds of change were planted in fertile ground. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity was just getting started. In the months that followed the summit on Varanthos Prime, the Galactic Concord fractured in ways that no one could have predicted. High Sovereign Malachar returned to the Veluxi. Imperium humiliated and weakened, and his political rivals sensed blood in the water. 3 separate factions within the Imperium began plotting to remove him from power, each one promising to restore Veluxi dominance by crushing the upstart humans once and for all. The Silaxian hegemony formed a coalition with 2 smaller powers, publicly dedicated to containing what they called the human threat. The Thrawn Dominion closed their borders and began a massive military buildup, their spawning pools producing soldiers at rates not seen in centuries. War seemed inevitable, and every analyst in the galaxy predicted that humanity would soon face the combined might of species that had been conquering worlds since before humans had discovered fire, and then Earth did. Something that changed everything. Ambassador Chun appeared before the Galactic Communication Network and announced that humanity was offering to share the technologies that had built the true fleet, not selling them, not trading them for political advantage, sharing them freely with any species willing to sign non-aggression treaties with Earth. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Smaller species that had lived under the shadow of the great powers for millennia suddenly saw a path to independence. The Volthri Collective, long considered a minor player in galactic politics, was the first to accept humanity's offer. Within 3 months, their defense capabilities had increased tenfold. And for the first time in their history, they could refuse demands from larger powers without fear of annihilation. The Kethrani Republic followed, then the Solari Federation, then a dozen other minor species who had survived only by bowing to whoever was strongest at any given moment. Each one gained access to weapons and shields and propulsion systems that had previously been beyond their reach. And each one joined a growing network of species aligned with Earth. The coalition that had formed to contain humanity found itself facing an impossible situation. Admiral Kethvora requested an audience with Ambassador Chun and asked the question that had been burning in his mind since the true fleet's revelation. "Why?" he demanded. "Why would you give away your greatest advantage? You could have used this technology to build an empire larger than anything in galactic history, and instead you give it away to species that were never your allies. Chun smiled slightly at the frustration in his voice. Let me answer your question with another question, Admiral. In the 12,000 years since the Concord was founded, how many species have risen up against their conquerors? Cathvora considered this for a moment. Hundreds, perhaps thousands. Rebellion is a constant threat that requires vigilance to suppress. Exactly, Chun replied. You spend enormous resources maintaining control over populations that hate you, fighting wars against species that would rather die than serve. And every victory creates more enemies who will eventually strike back. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. We chose a different path. Instead of creating subjects who resent us, we create allies who are grateful to us. Instead of spending our energy on oppression, we invest in cooperation. And instead of fearing that our neighbors might one day grow strong enough to threaten us, we make sure that when they grow strong, they remember who helped them. Cathvora processed this information with the careful calculation that had served him through centuries of military command. And slowly he began to understand what humanity had really achieved. You are building a coalition, he said. Not through conquest, but through generosity. We are building a family, Chun corrected him. A family of species who choose to stand together because they genuinely benefit from the relationship, not because they fear punishment for leaving. The Admiral was silent for a long moment. The Silexian hegemony has survived for 8,000 years through strength and ruthlessness. Your approach seems naive and destined to fail. Perhaps, Chun acknowledged. But consider this, Admiral. How many of your subjects would fight to defend the hegemony if they had another option? How many worlds would leave your control tomorrow if they thought they could survive independently? She let the question hang in the air before continuing. Our allies would fight for us because they want to, not because they have to. And an army that fights with conviction is worth 10 that fight only from fear. The conversation ended without resolution, but Cathvora returned to the hegemony with thoughts he had never allowed himself to consider before. Over the following year, the galaxy continued to transform. The coalition against humanity never launched their promised attack, because too many of their subject species had already defected to Earth's growing alliance. High Sovereign Malachar was eventually deposed by his own council, replaced by a younger leader who recognized that the old ways of conquest and domination were no longer sustainable in a galaxy where the weakest species could access weapons that made them dangerous to the strongest. One by one, the great powers of the Concord were forced to adapt or face isolation. Some chose to join humanity's alliance, accepting that shared prosperity was preferable to endless war. Others retreated to their core systems and began the long process of transforming from empires into something closer to nations, maintaining their identity without claiming ownership of others. And through it all, the true fleet remained vigilant. A quiet reminder that humanity would never again be easy prey. Fleet Admiral Sofia Torres retired from active duty 5 years after the revelation, passing command to a new generation of officers who had grown up knowing that their species stood as equals among the stars. At her retirement ceremony, Ambassador Chun gave a speech that was broadcast across the galaxy. 60 years ago, humanity looked at the stars and saw threats in every direction. She said, "We could have surrendered to despair, or we could have built weapons and hoped they would be enough to save us." She paused, looking out at an audience that included representatives from over 40 species. We chose to prepare, not just for survival, but for something better. And when the moment came to reveal our strength, we chose to use that strength not for conquest, but for liberation. Today, we stand at the center of an alliance built on mutual respect and shared benefit, not because we forced anyone to join, but because we proved that there is a better way. The species who laughed at us have learned that humanity was never weak. We were patient, and now that patience has paid off in ways they never imagined. She smiled, and there was pride in her expression, but no arrogance. We are not conquerors. We are builders, and together with our allies, we will build a future where no species ever needs to hide in fear again. Across the galaxy, in homes and ships and stations too numerous to count, beings of every shape and form listened to her words. Many had once dismissed humanity as primitive and irrelevant. Now they understood that they had been looking at something entirely new. A species that measured strength, not in how much they could take, but in how much they could give. The laughter that had once filled the halls of Varanthos Prime was long forgotten, replaced by something far more valuable: respect. And in the darkness between stars, the true fleet continued its endless patrol, standing guard over a galaxy that was finally learning to choose cooperation over conquest. Humanity had shown them the way. All they had to do was follow.